Yeah.
Right. So I'm just going to test mine.
Okay.
Right. It actually says mine is live. Excellent connection. I'm live on YouTube.
Great. Okay.
So
Would you like me to go live,
yeah,
or should
you
I go
you go
live at
live as
1
well.
right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we just know that that is done.
Okay. Um, go live webcam.
In some parts of Somalia, the vagina is cut up so bad.
Oh, that'll be you.
Wait, I'm trying.
You literally
I'm
just go onto your manage page and it
Yes.
should actually say that you're streaming live, but you might need to hit
Okay.
go live.
Okay. Yeah, there's create and then I have go live up here.
Yeah, go live.
Yeah.
Don't create,
Yes.
and it'll just.
Yes. And then here, how do I This is an issue we ran into last time.
Okay. Do you want to let's share your screen then?
Yeah.
I'll give you. Yeah, we've got a lot of people here, so some of your patrons are actually here.
Yes.
All right, so I am.
Webcam. I would think it would be
It's not
Oh,
webcam.
actually, yeah, but the webcam is just create a new one.
Yeah,
Um,
I've. You can share your screen with me now. So
okay.
let's do that.
Yes. Share screen. Excellent. Okay.
All right,
So
so
you'd
go.
think
I
it's
went
under
to manage. No, just come out of
Yes.
that. Hit manage over on the left hand side.
Okay. Manage and
Right,
then
and click on that. So you've got one event, Map Corner live stream. Click on that.
yes. Yes. And that takes us back to the main sector. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's
Now just
go
it's just go live already. So just wait for that to
Yeah.
settle down. Then you had a go live
Yes.
button on the top right.
Yes. Top right and then go live.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Thank you very much, sir.
yeah,
I'm about
yeah,
to go live. Yes. Excellent. We good?
yeah.
Great.
All right, it's fantastic.
Okay.
So now I can take back.
Yeah. Go to the Zoom, and then from there we can go full screen. Everything running well now?
Well, we're good. We are good.
Great.
And
Okay,
just
fans who are watching this, is everything good now? Do you see everything well?
I, I think we're all good. So
Great.
if you are watching us, this is
Yes.
Map Corner with myself, Royfield Brown, and with Claire Asprey, and we have a superstar YouTube guest. It's Rudyard Lynch. So you're watching the DVD extras right now, whilst we are getting this stream properly up and ready. So this is the director's cut. So Claire, do
Yep,
you have the scripts already? Is it?
the script's there. Yeah,
All right. Okay. I got a feeling this is going to be one of those most awesome episodes where I do monumental fluffs, and but there's going to be great nuggets of information. So if you are watching, just bear with us. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. We have a few people on Zoom ready to join us. Da, da, da. If you are watching on YouTube, what we're going to attempt to do is to include your questions at some point in the show. So if you've got any questions, you can kind of type them out. If you are a Patreon of Rudyard's, you should have had a Zoom link. So I'm just getting my script up, and just bear with me. So we've got that and that. Okay, great. All right. I think we can admit people into the room, Claire, and we
alrighty.
can kind of go. Um, all right. Right, hello everybody. Just before we start the show, I'd like to welcome our 15 participants who are on Zoom. So we have a right royal mixture of Map Corner stalwarts, people like Andy Gladwin and Fiona Powell over there in Pennsylvania, and we have some Rudyard Lynch's Patreons. So this is a very special Map Corner. Map Corner is a podcast where we talk about all things, map-like, because Claire and I love a map. And we are joined by Rudyard Lynch, who's a bit of a superstar YouTuber. And I must admit, I've been following his channel for quite some time, so it's a great honour to actually have the great Mr. Lynch with us today. So this is just a little bit of the preamble before we start the show. If you've never joined us before on Map Corner, I know we now have a lot of new people on Zoom. How it works is we do our podcast. Claire and I, and we interview somebody. This is going to be Rudyard, and then you have the opportunity to not only play along with our Map Corner quiz, but also to ask the great man himself a question or two. Now, there are many people watching us also on YouTube. It's probably in the hundreds. We are going to try and get some of your questions in at some point. Now, Map Corner, the podcast, kind of lasts for round about an hour, round about the hour mark. We're going to stop with the Map Corner format, and if there are questions over there on YouTube, we'll try and just take those to give those people who've been waiting on YouTube a bit of extra added content. All right, so that's what's going to happen today. Please, if you are on Zoom, keep your microphone muted unless you're called up to ask a question. And on that note, I think we should start the show formally. So 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Map Corner. I'm Royfield Brown, who's 37.8 degrees north and 122 degrees 0.3 minutes west, which puts me in Oakland in California. And with me is Claire Asprey. Where are you today, Claire?
Hi, Royfield. Today I'm in my usual resting place. God, that sounds like I'm dead. I'm not dead. I'm in my usual home of 52.1 degrees north and 0.5 degrees east in Bedfordshire, UK.
Map Corner is the podcast dedicated to the love of maps and to all things cartophilic. So if Peters is your projection, folks, you're in the right place.
So this month we are bringing together geography and history, which goes well with Royfield because he loves a bit of both, and me too, with our guest Rudyard Lynch from the What If Alt Hist channel on YouTube. So Rudyard posts really fascinating videos around combining sort of facts with speculation about alternative historical outcomes, and they're heavy on the maps, which we all love.
This month's audio postcard comes from a Brummie, somebody from my hometown who has done great photographic and video work around lockdown Birmingham. Don't forget, folks, to review us on Apple iTunes. If you are watching us over on YouTube, maybe on Rudyard's channel or on my YouTube channel, this is a podcast. Why don't you go and subscribe to us on Apple iTunes or a podcatcher of your choice.
And again, we're doing well. We're live in all sorts of ways this time. So as usual, we're doing this on live with Map Corner listeners and also some of Rudyard's Patreons on Zoom. But it's great to have that extra reach for YouTube watchers right now.
We record every first Saturday of the month, which is 6 p.m. UK time, which translates to being 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific.
All right. And if you want to join in, obviously join the Map Corner Facebook group and you'll get the links there for the Zoom every month.
Right. So I love me some history, as Claire says, and I definitely love me some geography. And so it's a great honour that we have Rudyard Lynch, who manages to combine that, but also with a certain amount of geopolitics and with some kind of creative thinking. Rudyard, welcome to Map Corner.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
What is alternative history for those of us that maybe don't know?
It's basically the process of you take something in history and see how the world would have progressed afterwards if that thing had gone differently. So what would modern Europe and the world be like if the Roman Empire had never fallen? Um, what would the world be like? The most common example, and I think over half the sales of the entire alternate history genre, is what if the Nazis won World War II? And it's basically as simple as that, where you take a point in history, then you change a variable, and then you see how the rest of history would have progressed differently.
And how did you get into it, sir? Because you've got
Actually,
somewhat of an extensive channel. So let's go
yeah.
all the way back to the very beginning.
So, as a punk ass teen, I was reading a book series called The Time Riders, and it's a time travel series. It's great YA, and it has a series of alternate history scenarios. And I just found them absolutely fascinating. I loved history ever since I was really little. I got into it because I love mythology so much, and it was just amazing to me that people who that I love people like Thor, like Hercules and stuff. And for real history, it just shocked me that people that amazing or close to it actually existed. And I loved history because of that. And I was reading this YA book, and the alternate histories in it actually weren't that good. And so it got me thinking about how I would have made those alternate histories differently. Like it has the Germans seizing all of North America in World War II. It had it had stuff like the dinosaurs getting wiped out and not getting wiped out and evolving into a sentient species later on. And I founded the channel not for any real reason, but just because I wanted to have a platform to really talk about all this stuff, because I didn't really have like a group of friends or stuff where I could discuss these really weird abstract ideas. So I was just screaming into the void. And over time, people started listening to my random screamings into the void, and that's how the channel grew.
So you started the channel to because you had no friends,
Yeah.
to make friends.
Yeah.
Or it's just an unexpected side effect, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the unexpected side effect is this career. And that this has basically become a significant part of my life.
Well, that's the amazing thing when we chatted yesterday and we did a little bit of a test.
Yeah.
Um, that this really has exploded for you, and
Yeah.
this is your job. This is your living now.
Yeah. Yeah, this is my source of income. This is what I do now. It's yeah, you can really live off this. It's for people who want to become YouTubers, it is a feasible lifestyle if you can get it past a certain range.
Well, dude, I need to take some lessons from you because I'm still scrabbling around here for pennies. But okay, so alternative history. This is what I fundamentally know about alternative history. There are really popular departure points, and as you said, you've already given us one, which is what if the Germans had won the Second World War. The other one, which is incredibly popular, definitely for Americans, is what if the South had won the Civil War. Give us maybe two or three
Okay.
departure points in history which alternative history aficionados love and adore.
Okay. What if the Roman Empire never fell is one of the very key ones, as is what if the Soviet Union had won the Cold War? A really big one, and this isn't especially history people because history people tend to not be that good at the sciences, is what if the dinosaurs never went extinct? And I would think those few have the biggest market share of all of them. You get a couple other ones like what if the Native Americans are able to beat back the Europeans? But I'd say that those have the biggest market share.
I watched one this week around, which I liked, which was around
Yeah.
what if the Danish invasion, no, the Norwegian invasion had won in 1066 and beaten back the
Yeah.
North. And what I really liked about that was also that you've given quite a lot of thought about how it would happen. It wasn't just saying, well, just imagine this. It was like, well, how might that have happened in the first place? And thinking about
Yeah.
the timing. So, like, it's not just about taking an
Yes.
outcome or a change, but also thinking out about how it might have been feasible, which I
Yes.
think is also, just goes to show that, life's got a lot of variables, and it's good to know how we might think about those like very small things that would
Yeah.
be different that make a collective difference.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true, I think. It's alternate history basically taught me how complicated the world is and how many different flowing parts there is because I think basically every male history buff at least got into it from military history. And like they're like, if I could change this one battle, how would the rest of this war had gone differently? But I think after a certain point with alternate history, you have to realize that stuff like culture, stuff like governance structure, stuff like ideology really does matter. And so, like for me, I started out doing the whole military history stuff, like playing Age of Empires and Total War and games like that. And over time, the more you get sucked into it, the more it becomes a whole culture, demographics, all that stuff, government styles. Yeah, it's very much a rabbit hole.
But you're very map heavy in terms of which is why we like it, in terms of the videos. So are you particularly drawn to things that you can demonstrate, I guess, on a map? Because there are different ways of presenting these stories,
Yeah.
isn't there? And it feels like the maps are the kind of medium that you enjoy best.
Yeah, I am kind of obsessed with maps, not gonna lie. Um, and I mean, I do try to respect stuff that you can't portray on a map. Like I was reading this book by Peter Turchin that talks about society's asabiya, or their like collective or their sense of like collective identity. So like North Italy versus South Italy, the trains run on better time, less corruption, and that's something you just can't map at all. And but I think at the same time it's very important. But I mean, I do think your argument has validity where once you rely heavily on one medium, you're kind of it becomes easier to forget about the other ones and to forget what that medium doesn't represent.
And when you're putting that together for the videos, how are you making or sourcing those maps?
Um, I make the maps. So for a lot of the videos, it's just stuff I know already. So I have a general understanding of what Europe looked like in 1700. I would reference a couple other people's maps to see if what I'm doing is accurate. Most of my information I get is just stuff that's online, and because it's difficult to source stuff that's not online. So in my ethnic map of the world, for example, I looked at old Soviet maps of Siberia and then tried to figure out what the ethnic map of Siberia looked like based off that. Um, that sort of thing.
I, I must admit the maps are definitely something which kind of drew me in, and as little 12-year-old me, I was forever doing alternative maps of the world based on nothing else other than wouldn't it be nice if, I don't know, Romania had an empire type of thing and it spread into Africa. So,
Yeah.
but one of the great things about what you do is you've backed it up with some really good scholarly research, haven't you? And so it isn't just a flight of fancy when you create your map and you have your scenario. So maybe tell us some of the kind of sources that you draw upon for your alternative scenario, so that it's actually plausible that if this battle or if this thing had gone another way, the world as it is that you propose would actually be plausible, would be realistic.
Hmm. Well, I have no I make no pretensions to being plausible. I'm basically betting against God here. But but I mean I read a lot. I'm not gonna give you credentials I don't have. I haven't finished college. I have no credentials to speak of in a traditional sense, but I read a tremendous amount, and I try to read big picture books that talk about the underlying structure of how history works. So I love my Peter Turchins, love my William McNeil's, all that stuff. And so I try to figure out the processes of how societies form, what weakens them, and all that stuff. And then I try to use those projections to figure out how things could have gone differently.
So okay, let's give us one departure point, and let's do a pretty standard one. At what point could the Germans have won the Second World War? Give us a
Well,
plausible departure point, and
well,
then
this one is going to, my fans are going to get absolutely bent out of shape about this one because World War II is so contentious. But if I had to pick a single point, it would be the US not entering into the war against Germany, because the US just brought so much materiel against the Germans that after that point, there was basically no way the Germans could have won the war. And I don't think the Germans would be able to fully beat the Russians in the East. But a couple variables like the American bombing of German industrial sectors basically prevented German industrial growth from reaching a massive rate from which it could have dealt with the Russians more effectively. And also just pulling men away from the Eastern Front and the massive amount of materiel the Americans sent the Russians. So I think that the Russians and the Germans, under those circumstances, would have probably fought to a standstill somewhere in central Ukraine. And also, you've got to consider there's no way the British were able to open up a front in the West without the Americans. And if you wanted to have a larger German empire, I think the best point of departure would be German seizure of Moscow in 1941.
December.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Right. Let's see if we can pull some holes in your argument.
Yes.
Here, right.
Yeah.
So the Soviets had plans to completely remove all of their industry behind the Urals, and actually did a lot of that anyway when the Germans came to the outskirts of Moscow in 1941. If we look at D-Day 1944, a month after D-Day, 4/5 of the German army is fighting the Russians. Right, so that's how serious the Germans took the Allied invasion. Well, I put it to you, sir. I put it to you, right, that the point of departure is Winston Churchill not becoming Prime Minister and Lord Halifax saying to Cabinet, right, we need to come to accommodation with the Germans. That accommodation being happening, the neutralisation of the British Navy, and then we have an invasion of Russia, which happens 1942, 1943, when the German industrial complex is much stronger. Boom. There you go.
I mean, that's entirely reasonable. I agree with you. And you're a British person, and so you'll say Britain was decisive, and I'm an American, so I'll say America was decisive. If we brought Yuri in, he'd say that the Red Army's defeat of the Germans at Stalingrad at Operation Uranos was decisive, and we'd all be right. Those were all points where if the Germans had played their cards right, they could have won the war. But yeah, I mean, I actually think the Western influence was more important for against the Germans by weakening their industrial sector than it was by actually pulling troops away from the frontier. But that's a separate topic.
Fair enough. And fundamentally, this is a show about maps. So tell us. I know Claire has mentioned maps before, but tell us. So you've given us a little bit of detail about maybe sources of how you put your maps together. Give us a map which you're particularly proud of, which had a lot of scholarly work, but also looked really pretty.
I mean, I've got loads of moderators who tell me all my maps suck and make maps way prettier than mine. One of my best friendships actually started from a guy who sent me images of my own maps better done than the ones I had made. And I'd tell you lots of people who'd say that my maps aren't that scholarly, but I'm probably most proud of my ethnic map of the world because actually my lingual map of the world, my ethnic map of the world is fairly derivative of my lingual one, but my lingual one was so much work. It was doing the research for each language in New Guinea and Cameroon took me a month basically, where I had to go through different maps of the same area. And often the sources are just pretty contradictory, where a different map of West African languages or Indonesian languages is just entirely different from another one. And I don't know which map is accurate. And so languages was very difficult. After that, the ethnic map of America is one I'm very proud of, because figuring out American ethnicity is very difficult because the ancestries that people file on the census from genetics, from last names, are not that accurate of what actual ancestry is. Your average American is many different countries. Your average African American has ancestry from Cameroon, Nigeria, the Congo. Average European American has ancestry from Germany, Britain, Ireland, Asian, probably the Philippines and China, etc. And so it's very difficult to break it into different sections. And so I had to do a huge amount of research on the various settlement patterns in early America to say, this area had slightly more German ancestry than this area, that had slightly more English, that this more than slightly more Finnish. So that map was a lot of research, and I had to read a lot of histories of early America to do that.
Do you have a question there, Claire? I thought you were primed, Aspirin.
No, I was just contemplating. It's a lot of work, isn't it? That it comes together on a comparatively short video, but actually there's a huge amount that goes into those. I guess like anything, it's it's the research that takes the time and making the pictures. Are there parts of the world that hold your interest more on a sort of geographical level?
Yeah. I once made a map of the areas of the world I've read the most history about, and none of my fans will ever see it because then they'll criticize it. But the area I've read the most about is England, followed by the north of France. And then after that, followed by the former Roman Empire. Um, the part of America I've read the most about is actually East Tennessee, surprisingly. Um, and yeah, I'm trying to think of a strange area of the world I had a fascination with. Um, but I mean, in general, I try to read about everywhere. If I know there's an area I don't know a lot, I'll actively reach out to find a book about it.
Well, I really enjoyed your video about places that have got really interesting stories, but no one knows very much about. But don't say too much about that because quite a lot of that coming up in the quiz.
Yeah. Yeah, it really annoys me how often Eurocentric history is, where like I get most people don't know a lot of history, and so people prioritize the stuff that's kind of similar to them and is like history before 1800 is the exact same way, where there's very little about it. But you've got so much awesome history from other parts of the world that just no one talks about. Like I wish the War of the Triple Alliance was a household term because Francisco Solano Lopez, he's basically a film character, and all that sort of thing.
You know what? I couldn't agree more. And when you think of the depopulation that went on in Paraguay because of this
Yeah,
maniac's desire to invade Brazil and Argentina with this
yeah,
minuscule population,
yeah,
arguably Paraguay is depopulated to this day. But
yeah.
Paraguay is one of the questions in our quiz, folks. So this is the time where if you have paper and pen, you should maybe get paper and pen together and you can play along with our quiz. If you're watching on YouTube, why don't you do that? So each month we have a map corner quiz and it's kind of loosely based.
This is brilliant.
Don't laugh. Don't laugh. And it's based around our interviewee. So Claire Asprey's put these questions together. These questions are most awesome.
Yeah, and I would just say it's another one of those months in which you're probably going to guess more than you know. Unless you're Rudyard, but that's kind of cheating because
I did a certain amount of guessing here as well. It has to be said. Right, so
you had it last month. This month we've gone hard again.
Question number 1. Which of these nations does Rudyard not tip for superpower status in 2080? Does not tip. Is it A, India, B, France, or C, Australia? Are we going to have a mighty Australian empire come 2080? Which of these nations does Rudyard not tip for superpower status in 2080? That's question number 1. Question number 2. Right, now, Rudyard, could you pronounce this, please? Where are the...
My Persian fans tell me I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but I'm going to say Shwarism.
Where are the Shwarism based? Is it
Yes.
A, Turkey, B, Uzbekistan, C, Mongolia? So, where are the... What was that again?
Shwarism.
Shwarism based.
You can call them Khorasan. That's the easier term.
Well, that's what I knew it as, but I thought, you're the scholar, sir.
Yeah. I've heard... sorry.
A, Turkey, B, Uzbekistan, C, Mongolia. Which of these countries wasn't part of the Austronesian migration? All right, so A, New Zealand, B, Cambodia, C, Madagascar. Which of these countries wasn't part of the Austronesian migration? A, New Zealand, B, Cambodia, C, Madagascar.
This chat really knows its stuff.
Well, because they watch your videos. Question number 4. What was it once illegal to sell in Iceland? A, cod, B, alcohol, C, flags. What was it once illegal to sell in Iceland? Was it A, cod? They beat Britain 3 times in the cod war, did the Icelandics. B, alcohol, C, flags. Question number 5. What does Rudyard credit the establishment of Paraguay by Spanish settlers? Put my teeth in. So I'm going to say it one more time. To what does Rudyard credit the establishment of Paraguay by Spanish settlers? Was it A, farming, B, polygamy, C, famine? So was it A, farming, B, polygamy, or C, famine? Question number 6. It's another one of those where you might need to help me with the pronunciation, Mr. Lynch. Where is the man-made island of
Pohnpei. Again, I don't speak Polynesian, but I assume that's how it's pronounced.
Can't say Polynesian, just giving the answer away, man.
Fuck. I'm sorry. I'm just here to educate you all.
Is Polynesia in the Caribbean? Is
Yes.
Polynesia in the Atlantic? Or
As
is
we all know, Polynesia is in the Caribbean.
or is Polynesia in the Pacific? So where is the man-made island of Pohnpei? Is it in the Caribbean, the Atlantic, or the Pacific? Question number 7. I got this one wrong. What proportion of the British Empire population was Indian in 1925? 40%, B 60%, or C 70%? What proportion of the British Empire population was Indian in 1925? 40%, 60%, or 70%? Andy Gladwin is working away at the answers there. Yes, I'm looking at you, scribbling it down, working it out. Last question. Where have we found potential evidence that the Romans may, stress on the word may, have discovered the Americas? Was the evidence found on the Brazilian coast? Was it found in Florida? Or C, found in Panama? There you go, folks. There are our quiz questions. We're at that point. We're at that point where we should have an audio postcard. Now, the audio postcard this month, I think it's either lost in my email or it was never sent. So we have something a little bit different this time. This is especially for Andy Gladwin because he loves my hometown. This is a little video about the UK's hotspot of culture. It's Birmingham. There you go. Stick your M62 up your jumper, sir. Right,
What a
Birmingham,
canal in sight!
and not a canal in sight. I know.
Where are the canals?
That you've got to go. It's a real recommendation. If you type into YouTube, lockdown Birmingham, this guy is. This is his third video, and I think on the first video there are the canals in Birmingham, but he's done three of these now. And what he does, he gets up early in the morning in lockdown, about 5 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody about, very obviously, and just shoots Birmingham. And it's been a real smash in Brum. The council have been asking him to do stuff for him because he's just made the place look wonderful. He's done a really bloody good job. So on YouTube, type in lockdown Birmingham. You see his first two, and there are the canals in the other two. But he's done an amazing job indeed. So that is our video postcard. By the time we do the podcast, I will actually put a little bit of audio to this, so it makes sense on the podcast. But now it's the time, folks, where you can ask a question of our esteemed guest. So if you are on Zoom, hello Fiona Powell, hello Ken McDonald, hello Sarah Spilsbury. Hey Sarah, are you hometown? You saw a bit of Brum there, didn't you?
Yeah, that's more than I've seen of it in person recently. Yeah, mate, got quite emotional actually watching that. Yeah, it's a good video though.
Absolutely excellent video. Hello, Pat. Now, Heltor, you look new. Are you, Heltor, a Map Corner person, or you one of Rudyard Lynch's Patreons? Tell us who you are, sir.
Hello, I'm in his patron.
Ah, cool. Well, this is your moment to ask the person who you give some of your hard-earned money to. A question. Do you have a question?
Hello, man. Nice to meet you. I'm a fan nice from Rio in Brazil. I study history as well. I would like to know if you have ever been able to read something about the history of Brazil, because I know like there are very few translations available.
Yeah, I have never read a full book on Brazilian history. I've read a couple of Latin American histories with extensive parts in it. So I read a 1,000-page history of Latin America that had a 200-page segment on Brazil, and a couple stuff like that. Yeah, I recognize your name actually from my Patreon. You commented in my 2100 video, right? Or my 2100 map, right?
Probably, I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah.
Do we have another question? I must admit, I'm always fascinated by Brazilian history. I've got a little bit of a soft spot, considering I'm a proper lefty. I've got a soft spot for monarchies, and Brazil always has this weird bit of history, doesn't it? The fact that it's the only time a European country has been ruled by somebody in the New World. So you have Pedro the First, who was also King of Portugal, but Emperor of Brazil for a time.
Yeah, we had actually the King of Portugal. He fled from the Napoleonic invasion, and he went to Rio. So for like some time, Portugal was ruled from Brazil.
Absolutely. And then the imperial family just withered away. Sorry, Rudyard.
Belloc, do you have any recommendations for Brazilian histories for me?
I have a very good book about that.
Yes.
I can show it to you. It's
great. I can read English and French, so those are the two you can pull from.
Book here is called. Can you read it? Oh, I have to take.
No, I can't.
Because
you can just tell me the title. I'll remember it.
It's called Empire Adrift. It's from Patrick Wilkin. It's about the Portuguese court in Rio de Janeiro.
Yes. Okay, great. Empire Adrift.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Welcome, man.
Do we have another question for our esteemed guest? Oh, Pat, unmute yourself. You go for it, Pat.
Hi, I'd just like to know if your travels through history and around the world ever include in-person travel. Have you gone places and tried to imagine what it would look like there if something else had happened?
Yes. Yeah. One of the big examples of that was when I was in Turkey and I was walking through the Hagia Sophia, and I was just imagining at the front entrance how many emperors walked through that spot, how many Byzantine emperors walked through that very location. Or I went to Troy and I was thinking about how over the 4,000 years, how we we're still thinking about the thing that occurred back then. And it's stuff like that that can just let your mind wander off to fascinating places. Or I'm from Pennsylvania, and I sometimes wonder what it would be like if, well, I wonder what the land would have looked like 6,000 years ago when they didn't even have the bow and arrow, and it was just endless forest.
Are you satisfied, Pat? Do you have another?
Oh, yes, yeah, thank you. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and I often wander around thinking, what if an old building that what used to be here were still here, or what if it were all virgin forest still? So, thanks.
Ken has a question.
And McDonald,
I was just hello. I was just wondering if you see what you're doing as sort of part of the speculative fiction of the multiverse, like Man in the High Castle, or even his Dark Material.
Yeah, I'm in a really weird spot where what I'm doing is nonfiction, but it's actually fiction. Where, like, I once got a book contract I had to reject, and it would have gotten put in the history part of the bookstore, where I was writing counterfactuals, but it was in a nonfiction way. So I would be writing, like, what if the Nazis won World War II, but it wouldn't be a narrative, it would be a historical analysis.
I think one of my first experiences of alternative history was Stephen Fry's book, Making History. I don't know if you've read that, but that, again, that's a kind of it's sort of a what if the Germans won World War II, but it's more of a what if Hitler wasn't successful and other things were.
Yeah.
But it makes you think about, you'll be careful what you wish for, because we might think a particular outcome wasn't very good, but actually the alternative outcome could have been a lot worse. And are you ever tempted to, when you're looking at alternative histories, are you ever tempted to take a particularly optimistic or pessimistic view, or how do you keep that balance?
Yeah, one of my moderators actually did an analysis of my alternate histories, where are they more negative or positive than the present? And I think it was either perfectly balanced, or it was 2/3 negative, 1/3 positive. I generally think the modern world as it exists is one of the better timelines, but I have no clue. I mean, I don't have a giant, like, magical ball that I can look through and tell me if this is a better world. I mean, we're the only frame of reference we have.
Yeah. And I guess it depends what side you were on about whether it's a positive or negative outcome anyway.
Yeah. I mean, as an American, I'm predisposed to think it's a better world because America is a pretty wealthy country. It's the most powerful country in the world. But if I'm from Iraq, I think this is a terrible world where things have just gradually gotten worse since the Middle Ages.
Yeah, and I guess that shows us that all empires rise and fall over much longer than normal human life span. And that everywhere's had its heyday.
Exactly.
And we'll look back to those glory days, maybe like 4,000 years later.
Yeah.
I look forward to the rise of the mighty Jamaican Empire. So that's just around.
Doing your bit for it, Royfield.
I tell you, the point for me when I first became aware and fascinated with alternative history, I forget the name of the book. I have it in England somewhere. But it was, what if Queen Victoria had been born male? And that was just completely blew my skirt up. And the whole point of it was, so up until that point, the Hanoverian rulers of England had also been the kings of Hanover in Germany. And because rulers of Hanover could not be female, she then gave the throne up of Hanover to her cousin, the Duke of Cumberland. So you've had George's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, not George V is a grandson. 4, and then William, who were all kings of England and also kings of Hanover. And then you have the 1840s, 50s, 60s, which is German reunification under Prussia. So the summation of the book was, if the King of England in 1837, when she becomes the Queen, had been male, and also been the King of Hanover, England and Prussia would have gone to war, and in effect had been a First World War much sooner than 1914, because
Nick.
Nick Roworth. Crumbs, you dastardly person, ask your question, Nick. Go for it.
I've been watching a few of yours, and you mentioned the butterfly effect. When you're doing them, how difficult does it get as you go along? Sort of, changing the history. How because obviously changing one bit of history builds onto the next. So how difficult is it to sort of take it forward, and how far forward can you take it?
One of the great benefits of my job is I have absolutely no accountability. So I can say things and there's no way I can be proven wrong. And so I have no idea if the method I'm using is correct. And for my geopolitics stuff, I always have a rule: only long-term predictions, because that way you have to wait 15 years for me to get disproven, and I can move along with my life. But in general, the butterfly effect gets into very complicated territory where we don't know if you push the butterfly effect too far, you just can't get anything done. I was talking to a friend and he's like, yeah, I wrote an alternate history where the internet's never formed and then 9/11 never happens. And he has no logical explanation for why that happened. He just said butterfly effect. And I think that's dumb, where if you say random things just change without an explanation why, you're basically getting rid of all logic out of the scenario, and you can just say whatever you want is going to happen. And so for the way I do it is that after a couple generations, I don't have any of the same historic figures born. So a mistake I made many, many years ago was I had a scenario where England won the 100 Years' War and Joan of Arc was never born and all that stuff. And I had Napoleon be born 800 years later. And in retrospect, I'm like, that's really dumb. But in a world where Sweden wins the Great Northern War in 1700, I still have Napoleon get born because nothing affects Corsica at that point. So Napoleon was born 1760, right? And if Sweden wins the Great Northern War in 1710 in Eastern Europe, that would still allow his parents to meet. So I try to be as rational as possible about it, where I only change things if the person being born is a really low chance of happening, or at the same time it's in a very different part of the world. So in a world where Genghis Khan is never born, I would still have Montezuma rising up in Mexico, because there wasn't really any contact between Eurasia and Mexico by that point.
Great.
Can I just ask a quick question before we move on? I can't help but feel like sometimes the real history feels completely mad and arbitrary and random, and particularly around some of the sort of post-war settlement stuff where a few diplomats got in a room and drew the map of Europe at various times, in the last sort of couple of hundred years, the way that Africa was carved up through imperialism and so on, in the hands of a very small number of people who might have had good intentions but often didn't really understand the lie of the land. It feels to me that sometimes that's almost unbelievable and alternative, well, not alternative, but because it actually happened, but arbitrary. Have you ever thought about unpicking some obviously arbitrary things that have happened, or what would you pick if you think that something that really happened was, easily unpicked because it felt so casually done in the first place?
Yeah, I think we have different perspectives on this, where for me, looking at a lot of this stuff, I can see the logic behind it and I can see how the logic would get changed. So Scramble for Africa, it was entirely arbitrary for the native inhabitants, but for the British, they had a fort here on the coast, they had a fort here on the coast. This river valley was easy to control. So like giving Belgium, the area that became the Democratic Republic of the Congo, looks entirely arbitrary. Why do you give this tiny European country a massive part of Central Africa that wouldn't really make sense? But if you see that they were trying to give that big area to a small power that was inoffensive to the European balance of power, aka not Germany, you can see that why they picked Belgium, because the Belgians are never going to attack French, British, or German territories. The Belgians are never going to say, let's make Belgium a world empire. The Germans are. And also, for a place like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it's a single river system. And like, and for places, and so you can change decisions that look arbitrary by changing the balance of power. So for, like, say, the scramble for Africa, you could have easily seen a world where the French took over all of Central North Africa from Djibouti all the way to Dakar. But the British were slightly more powerful in that era, so they took the Nile Valley. So if you had some sort of world where maybe the British got stuck fighting the Americans, and maybe Britain got stuck fighting a horrifying war with the Americans, and the British had to build an extra large fleet so the Americans wouldn't seize Canada. Maybe in that world, the French would have been able to press a British weakness in Africa and take over that massive empire.
That's interesting.
Great answer. Ronald Cohn, you've got a question. You got your hand up, sir. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question, Ronald?
Yes, and I am calling from 51.49 degrees north and 0.75 degrees west, which is the London borough of Southwark. So my question is, earlier you talked about at length if the Roman Empire had not fallen. And my question is opposite. What if the Roman Empire had not conquered the Iberian Peninsula or Spain, I think in the 200 BC, and stay there for 600 years before the Caliphate or the Moors take over? And what would be the impact to where I'm from, which is Venezuela in South America? What would be the impact to the whole continent and to the maps? Have you explored that?
Yes. Interesting. So the way you'd pull that off basically is that the Carthaginians had a large influence in southern Spain. They controlled the whole area, and the native tribes of that area actually liked the Carthaginians a lot. So when the Romans conquered Iberia, they were dealing with tribes that, in a lot of ways, it was the Carthaginian remnants fighting off the Romans. And so what you would have is a Carthaginian charismatic commander, maybe Hannibal's little brother who exists magically, is able to hold off the Romans. And it would basically have to become a confederacy of the native and Carthaginian influences, because as is, the native population didn't have the ethnic unity to create a state by itself. The Carthaginians had that external influence. But at the same time, the Carthaginians didn't have the manpower to fight off the Romans. And the big advantage of the Roman Republic in that era was that they could just pull on endless amounts of men to keep fighting. And Iberia's population around them was, I'm guessing, 3 million. That's a ballpark number. Italy's was like 6 million. That's where the Romans could pull troops from. So if the Iberians could drag it out into a lengthy guerrilla campaign, while also keeping their population unified, they could have beat the Romans. If the Romans don't control Spain, they don't control the western frontier, meaning they can't seize Gaul. Gaul becomes an independent country based under its own influence. So Celtic Spain. And honestly, at that point, I have no idea what's going to happen for South America because it's just so far out. I'm really sorry. The one thing I can say is the Carthaginians were a very navally based people. And so if you have a Carthaginian, Celt-Iberian Spain, that means that the chances that they become navally more important is higher than it was in our world because the Romans were a very land-based empire. And so the chances that they do go out and colonize, I think, are higher than it was in our world. And I have no idea for the Arabs. I have no idea if the Arab conquest would still happen at that point.
That's really interesting. And as someone who used to live in Granada, where obviously the retreat of the Moorish kingdom was quite big news there. I can't help but feel like it's almost, well, it kind of depends what happens next, like you say, because if there was not a caliphate for the Christian kingdoms to be trying to drive out, then it might have looked very, very different, because this was all happening around, that whole period was very dense between the reconquest of Spain, the discovery of the Americas. It was all happening around the same time. So, and I guess if there hadn't been a sense of a need for potentially for a religious reason to be doing the conquest of Spain, maybe there wouldn't have been the same drive to go overseas. Who knows? I think it's interesting. I'm not sure what, like you say, I don't know whether it relates to what happened before the caliphate or whether it relates to the caliphate itself. We could be here all day on that.
Andy Gladwin, you've got a question for us, Andy. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Hi there, Rudyard. It's probably quite an easy one. You mentioned before you'd read more about East Tennessee than anywhere else. I was just wondering why that was.
So I'm of part Scots-Irish heritage, and my family's originally from, my mother's side's originally from that area. They fought for the Confederacy, then switched over to the Union, and then moved out to Kansas. And my specialty for American history is cultural history. And so the area I've read the most about is the South. And it's something to do with, it was some weird aberration where once you account for colonial histories and histories of the West, East Tennessee became that area.
So we've had a question on the chat as well from Matthew, which says, what if the British colonized Latin America instead of the Spanish? Well, it wouldn't have been Latin America for a start, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting question, Matt. So let's say in this world, the English sees the Aztec. So let's say, and I think I've made a video about this actually, Matt. I think, so English move west and the English discover America before the Spanish do. The English there's a historical argument that the English actually did know about America before the Spanish did, that Bristol fishermen were operating off the coast of Newfoundland. But in this world, the British catch the southerly current, sail past the Azores, hit the Caribbean, colonize the Aztecs and the Peruvians in the same way the Spanish did. And honestly, I think it would be a much better world. So there are generally two arguments about why South America and Latin America is poorer than North America. Actually, there's three arguments. One of its geography, one of which is that once the Spanish conquered the native peoples, they constructed oppressive, exploitative structures. And the third is that the structures the British brought to Latin America, or the British or Spanish brought to the New World, reflected the countries back at home, and then they went out in different ways. And I'm part of the third school, where like the Spanish created a colonial structure of a lot of monopolies. The central government had a huge amount of control. They didn't give the native populations a lot of independent action. And so my guess is that the British would have constructed or the English at this point would have constructed a joint stock company like the British East India Company and would have used it to colonize Mexico. 17th century England was having huge population explosions due to the British civil wars and stuff. So you would have seen massive European immigration to the area that became Latin America. A lot of them would have died of disease, but a lot of them would have also moved into areas like the central Mexican highlands that has a much more temperate climate. You would have seen Latin America develop much more like North America did in our world. Something else to consider is that it would have made the English crown far more powerful, because the revenue from the colonies would have probably gone to the English king. It would have also gone to the mercantile classes. So you would have seen a strengthening of both the crown and the mercantile classes, which would have had ramifications in the English Civil War. But I'm not sure who would win in the English Civil War, the parliamentarians or the royalists. I also don't think all the English would have migrated to Latin America, because groups like the Puritans were explicitly looking for a colder land to settle. So I'm guessing the Puritans still settle in New England, but the excess population that goes to the Caribbean instead, like the people who went to the American South in our world, that would have probably left the American South open to French settlement.
Fantastic answer. Tell you what we should do, Claire. Why don't we rattle through the various beats that we need to do, social media roundup, etc., and then we can fold up our maps on Map Corner, but still keep the stream going if people want to ask Rudyard any more questions. So, Claire, do we have any news on the socials this month?
We do have some updates on the social media. I had a little bit more action on the Twitter feed this month, and that's on the hashtag Map Corner. Had some great stuff that Magic and Mungo's retweeted. One was around different ways of splitting up the UK, and one of some maps that I'd never really seen before. I think we were all familiar with, I don't know, the Anglo-Saxon groups and so on and so forth, but this one was districts of the major generals and garrison towns, which it's just a map I've never ever seen before. It's quite interesting. One that we had some discussion about was the reimagining each UK county as a US state. I particularly enjoyed the Isle of Wight as Hawaii, and Northern Ireland as Alaska, but there's if you're in the UK or the US, or you have some understanding of the UK counties and the US states, there's certainly plenty of things to think about on that, and that's on the hashtag.
Can I just say, I had proper beef with that map.
I know.
Proper beef. Right, Isles of Scilly should have been Hawaii for a start off. Incredibly warm.
Yeah, I guess.
And
but Cornwall is Florida. I sort of get that.
I had that much of a problem with that map that I said I'm going to do my own and post it, and it's a work in progress. That's all I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
But then when both Dr. Shoplin and Magic and Mungo's also posted this great definition of a bit of history about the way that UK postcodes work, which I think we perhaps touched on before when we talked about the address book, but it's based on cognitive psychology, and I think I totally get it, because I think our postcode system it looks kind of weird compared to the rest of the world, but it is so much easier to remember and to place things based on the way that our postcode system works in the UK. So that's a good read. And then on Facebook, our most popular post in the last month has been Robin Pickering's Identify the Countries quiz, which like no one will be surprised by, because we in Map Corner, we love a quiz and we love identifying countries by their outlines and flags. Right up our street, that was. A lot of people engaged with that. And we've had some good postings from the from the Southern Hemisphere, let's put it that way, with Marilyn Little and Brett Watkins posting from New Zealand and from Australia about locations there, and the way that we compare the size, just the absolute size of Western Australia to other things. So that was some of the stuff that's been going on in the last month. And if you want to be part of the discussion, post your favourite maps to us, have a bit of a chat, do a quiz, whatever, then do join the Map Corner Facebook group, and or look out the hashtag Map Corner on Twitter.
Smashing. Right, folks, it is quiz answer time. Right, so I know Pat over there in Northern Ohio was getting very antsy. He said, Royfield, need to know the answers to the quiz. Right, so question number one, which of these nations does Rudyard not tip for superpower status in 2080? You are either India, France, or Australia. The answer is Australia. Why are we not going to be living under the boot of the Australians in 2080, Rudyard?
It's difficult to answer negative questions, but I would say that they have no desire to be an empire. They're already part of the American umbrella. They don't have population growth that makes them want to go outwards.
Smashing. There's your answer, folks. Question number two, where was the Khorasan based? A, Turkey, B, Uzbekistan, C, Mongolia, and the question was B, Uzbekistan. Got that one right, I did. Way for me. Question number three, which of these countries wasn't part of the Austronesian migration? I actually got this one wrong, though I actually did know the answer in a weird way. The answer was B, Cambodia. Most people don't know the Austronesian migration. What was it exactly, Rudyard?
It was, so southeastern China, there was the native inhabitants have gradually been pushed out by people from the Yangtze, like 10,000 years ago with the invention of agriculture. They became the population of Taiwan, who in turn became the population of the Philippines. And then they had an epic migration outwards from the Philippines, settling practically all of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia. Then they jumped across the whole Indian Ocean from Borneo to Madagascar in like 200 AD, became the dominant population of Madagascar. Then they sailed along the top coast of New Guinea to stopping at inlets. Then they settled the whole Pacific and Polynesia, areas like that. They are the Polynesians mixing with the Melanesian population of New Guinea. Then they went to Hawaii and New Zealand.
I remember being utterly shocked when I discovered only about 10 years ago that New Zealand was only colonized by humans in like the 13th century. I just presumed it would have been eons beforehand, but yes, this migration was relatively recent in human history and was incredibly extensive. But for one of the, our history, our understanding of history is so Eurocentric based that we don't know this. You know, the average person doesn't know this. Question number 4. What was it once illegal to sell in Iceland? And the answer is alcohol. Why was that, Rudyard?
More hard liquor, actually. They produced beer. They could, I mean, everyone drank beer in that era, but the Danes, who were their colonial masters, thought the Icelanders were too immature for hard liquor and they couldn't drink it properly. And because Iceland didn't have any trees and they couldn't build any ships, they really weren't in a negotiating position with the Danes. And so the Danes just didn't sell them any.
Ah, there you go. Question number 5. What does Rudyard credit the establishment of Paraguay by Spanish settlers? It was B, polygamy. I always thought it was the Jesuits that were big in Paraguay, but obviously got that slightly wrong. Tell us about the story of polygamy founding the modern state.
So farming was part of that. I'm not going to lie. The initial population was Spanish conquistadors, and they tried to settle the area around Argentina, but the native populations there were really aggressive, and so they couldn't stay there. And so they went 600 miles upriver to what's now Paraguay, and they formed an alliance with the native Guarani woman, where each Spanish man took many, many, many different native brides, and then that's what the modern population of Paraguay basically is. And yes.
Can I make a comment? Or
yes,
go.
Yeah, the same thing happens in Brazil, because the Tupi, which were from the coast of Brazil, and the Guarani are from the same family, and they had like this culture where the chief like of a tribe, he gives his daughters like to an ally, and so the Portuguese and Spanish were really lucky to find that kind of people.
Yes, interesting. Is that the area around Sao Paulo?
Yes.
Okay, great.
But actually, the whole Brazilian coast until the Amazon was all like that.
Interesting.
One of the fascinating things about Paraguay, which is obviously one of the side effects of that rule, that law, was that it's the only country in South America where a European language isn't the dominant language. Guarani is the dominant language of Paraguay. And funnily enough, there's also an analogy with that in Haiti, isn't there? Where when the French were losing their grip on this rebellious colony, that one of the possible laws which was established, by the colonial French just before Toussaint and his generals kicked the French out completely, was every man could have 3 wives: a black wife, a mulatto wife, and a white wife. Is a way of placating the slaves and the African masses, but of course it never came to pass. Question.
I'd like to point out that polygamy is kind of polite way of basically saying systematized rape here, but just putting that out there.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you there, Claire. There's a reason why fundamentally, as an institution, it's never really stuck around, because it's various moral problems. Question number 7. What proportion of the British Empire population was Indian in 1925? And the answer was C, 70%. Crumbs. India was the jewel in the crown. And question number 8, the last question. Where have we found potential, stress on the word potential, evidence that the Romans may have discovered the Americas? It's on the Brazilian coast. Rudyard, what exactly was this evidence, sir?
I did this video like 4 years ago, and if I get the info wrong, Belloc's probably going to correct me. But I think there's a large amount of pottery found in Rio Bay that could be of Roman origin.
I don't know. I never heard of that. And there was something about Phoenicians.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's kind of difficult to say. I don't think the Romans were having a large scale settlement or large amounts of activity in Rio, but it wouldn't surprise me if a Roman boat got blown off course and sank there, especially the way oceanic currents work.
I forget the name of the author, but there's the book, is it 1429, which has now been kind of largely debunked, but it's really seductive, isn't it? About these large mahogany Spanish, Chinese ships going throughout the world, and we know that this did actually happen under a Chinese admiral, and they went all the way down the East African coast. We know that happened, went to India, the East African coast, but he speculates that they crossed, went past the Cape of Good Horn, went to the New World, and he says there is fragmented, scattered evidence of Chinese mariners being washed up. But it's a rip-roaring read, though largely debunked. Right, so I'm going on to gallery view, good people. Ken MacDonald normally does extremely well in these quizzes. Hello, Theodore. You look new to us, Theodore. Welcome. Who got all 8 right? Hold your hand up. Who got 7? 6.
Yay, well done, Belloc.
Hey, well done, sir. You win. You win the much vaunted, very prestigious Map Corner quiz. Now, here's the thing. This is your prize. Your prize is that you can do an audio postcard on a future episode of Map Corner. Basically, what that means is you tell us about where you live. Record it as an MP3, maybe do it on your phone, email it through to us. Will you be able to do that, sir?
Yes, I will.
Hooray! Brilliant. Was it Sao Paulo where you are?
I'm in Rio.
Rio. We would love to know about Rio. Claire, wouldn't you love to hear more about Rio from somebody from Rio?
I totally would.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. Next month's audio postcard comes all the way from Brazil. Now, Claire, just before... Sorry, go on.
No, I need... I actually, it's my first time knowing the podcast, so I send from... Where do I find it? Do you have an email?
In the chat.
Right?
Yeah, we'll send it to you in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll contact you afterwards, and we'll set this up.
Okay.
Can you send me one as well? Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll do all of that. Yeah. Now, Claire,
I believe Matthew DiMarcantonio dropped some questions in the chat. If we're answering those,
I tell you what, let's wrap up the Map Corner show. Then we're going to come back because I know there's people asking lots of questions. So I'll just rattle through this. Claire, do we have a map fact of the month?
We do. I did a lot of digging today on my map fact of the month, and I found a map which was showing which US states Googled chess more and which ones Googled poker more, which is interesting enough as itself. But actually, the thing that I'm having as my map fact of the month was that every state of Mexico Googled chess more than they Googled poker, which will tell you something about the, I don't know, the intellectual interests of Mexico, or certainly maybe they're just not into poker, don't know. But just to show, chess is more popular than poker in Mexico. That's my fact of the month.
Who would have thunk it? Who would have thunk it? Now, Claire, is it time for us to fold up our maps and then we'll continue with the stream?
Yeah, so next month's recording will be the 3rd of April, and don't forget to leave us a review. Other than that, it's time to fold up our maps.
There you go, folks. Thank you for joining us on this rather exciting edition of Map Corner with Rudyard Lynch. Ta-ra a bit, toodle pip, bye-bye. Now, we're going to continue the stream going. So, Claire, why don't you read, if there's any questions in the chat there, you'll read them out. I'm going to go and look on YouTube and see what questions you also have for Rudyard there.
All right, so we have some questions from Matthew here, which are, well, there's a lot of very complicated and questions we could spend all day talking about, frankly. So the first one is, what would American hegemony look like since World War II if the English colonized the Americas instead of the Spanish? So that's taking an earlier element of history and applying it to a much later element of history. So, you know, that's complicated.
Yes. I would say that Grand Columbia could never work, Matt, because so just geographically makes no sense. Venezuela is mostly based around the Los Llanos and the coastline. Colombia is mostly based around the internal mountain system. It would take Bolivar more than a month to walk across between the two of them. During Grand Colombia, Bolivar alternated between controlling the Venezuelan part of the empire and the Colombian part. Over time, his center of power moved to Colombia. And even with all the changes, there's no way the British could have made that early 19th century contact system work better. Ecuador at that point was really more part of Peru. And so I don't see, even with British colonization, Grand Colombia working. Argentina would have basically become exactly the same as Canada or the US. It's got a relatively similar climate. Mexico would have probably become more similar, would have been more similar to the US. Although
but
there's too many weird variables for me to get way too deep into this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there is one variable I would like to talk. You talked about how the English way of colonization was very different. Oh, in case you're wondering, I'm basically the guy trying to clean out the filth from the chat in the YouTube stream.
Yes.
But wasn't the whole English colonization style a consequence of the previous Spanish one? Because well, after the Spanish had did their share of colonization, the English wanted to get rich as well. So the fact that Central America was already taken, they would try to go into New England areas and try the exact same tactics and bring over way too many goldsmiths and all. But when that didn't work, they switched to a different method. Doesn't that kind of implies that the British would have taken that approach if they'd colonized Mexico?
That is a certain degree of validity, Theodore, where when the British first went to Virginia, they were trying to do exactly what the Spanish did. However, if you look at what the British did under pretty similar circumstances, it ended up very differently. So British and India, rather than setting up the structure, so everyone of that era wanted to conquer and enslave and get gold. Once you do that, results can be very different. So if you look at the British in India, where they conquered a heavily populated area, what they ended up doing was setting up a structure far more similar to what Britain was than for Latin America what Spain was. And so you ended up with it being masterminded by a company rather than the central government, although the Spanish colonization of the New World did use companies that were government monopolies. Which is kind of what the East India Company was, to be fair. But the British installed a democracy in India, more rule of law, that stuff. So I think a model closer to India is more similar to what would have happened if the British colonized Latin America, with the exception of areas like northern Mexico or Argentina that probably would have become majority British since the British exported so many people.
We have a question on 1 minute there.
Yes.
Helter. We have a question on YouTube. What do you think of the possible Kanzuk Union?
Wow. I know Royfield and I have had a conversation about this, but as a Canadian, I'd love to be able to move to London and not have any paperwork. But so I would personally enjoy having it work. I don't think the chances. I personally don't, from a geopolitical perspective, really see a point to it. But I personally like it.
I must admit, as somebody who is a staunch European, and I believe in the EU, it's a second best. You know, why not have free movement of travel for people from those countries? Though it is very much a watered down remnant of the British Empire. Do we have any more questions in the chat, Claire? I know that Ronald has also got a question as well. So let's do a question from the chat. Then Ronald, you're going to be next because you got your hand up.
Well, I think we've covered some of that. Let's move on to the next question.
All right, Ronald, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your next question?
Yeah, the question was partially already answered with the Grand Columbia, but as a follow-up, do you think the primary difference was not only the geography and the distance, as you talked about, but also the way, for example, North America was colonized with the original colonies, and then much later was the expansion west?
Yeah, I think that's a big variable. I read a very interesting book that said that the Spanish Empire, it just burst onto the scene immediately, and then it kind of ground to a halt. And after like 1600, the Spanish Empire didn't expand that much. It did in parts of Argentina, Chile, like Texas, California, but not that much. The British colonies built up on the coast for like 200 years, smashed across the continent in less than 100. And that's mainly because the differences between the two groups' demographic structures. So British colonies in North America were overwhelmingly rural. So you took like Scots, Irish, English, Africans, Germans, had them set up rural populations, have them breed with each other. And then once their numbers hit a critical mass, it was just mass expansion. What happened in Spanish America more was you had the Europeans take over the native population, and then population growth generally stagnated until mid-19th. So it grew a good amount in New Spain. Then the Wars of Independence declined it, and then there was massive growth after the mid-19th century. And so for like northern Mexico, a lot of the colonization of the northern areas and like defeating the Apache and stuff took place later than the US, or at the same time as the later parts of the US colonization of the West. So you saw a much more stable demographic structure in Latin America, partially because there was less incentive to have kids because of the landholding system with encomiendas. And so there really wasn't, like, if you had more kids, you didn't know that there'd be more lands for them to move outwards and expand from. So if you were in like rural Pennsylvania in 1700, you have 7 kids, those 7 kids are all going to have land. But if you're in Mexico, they just end up under the same landlord.
That's what I always thought was the massive difference was the land holding patterns. So in the English colonies, and they were much smaller, which gave you the incentive to go out and get more land. Whereas in the Latin American world, it's all large haciendas under a big overlord, so to speak. So there's no incentive for the population to actually go out and innovate and go and find new land, cultivate it, etc. So let's have a look at questions on YouTube. One of the questions here was, what would have happened if the Romans had colonized Ireland? If they'd conquered Ireland, sorry.
They probably would have installed a very similar system to Britain. Not gonna lie, I think that they would have probably left it like Scotland, because they wouldn't have seen a point. Like, there wasn't I'm half Irish, but I'll tell you, there wasn't really a point of colonizing Ireland because it was all cattle. There wasn't anything the Romans really wanted. And that was why the Romans never colonized Germany, because it was forests and cows. And so the Romans would have probably colonized it, controlled it for 40 years, and then went back. Because the whole imperial Roman system was basically built off having defensible frontiers.
But the Romans, I thought that was all about Hector and Teutoburg Forest, and that's the reason why they didn't do Germany. They could have got all the way to the Elbe. That would have been defensible.
Yeah. So Teutoburg, they did try to conquer Germany, but it's one of those things where once they failed, they didn't try again, or they tried again, but not really in like a full efforted way. If they wanted to conquer Germany, they could have. So the issue they have had with the Elbe is that they're moving the frontier further out. And so they'd have an occupied territory, and then they'd have another frontier. And most of their population, the troops they'd be pulling from, were from modern France and Italy. And so it would be the process of controlling a massive territory, subjugating it, and then having another frontier where you have to deal with people from beyond that. And I think it would have resulted in imperial overstretch where the Han Chinese at the same time were trying the same thing where they're pushing really far into Central Asia. And then it basically just resulted in the empire folding like a bunch of cards once it ran out of energy.
There's a question on YouTube before we come back onto Zoom, and maybe we should give this like another 10 minutes and then wrap this all up. Otherwise, we're going to go on all night.
Yeah.
This person specifically is asked about the dam between India and China. Now, I must admit, I don't know about that issue, but what I do know is that you've done quite a lot of work talking about the politics of water, specifically the Nile and Egypt and Ethiopia, and water is a big issue in the Middle East, specifically Palestine, Jordan, Israel, etc. So maybe tell us about the politics of water, water as a resource, and water as a source of conflict throughout the world geopolitically.
So as global warming continues, the amount of glaciers in the Himalayas declines. And the thing is, India, China, more than 2.5 billion people are dependent upon that water effectively. And so North Chinese Plain is projected to run out of water by 2030 due to industrial processes. It's not actually that dry an area. It's roughly similar climate to like Iowa. But North Chinese industrial processes do bad stuff to the water. And most large parts of India's water supply, somewhere around a quarter to a third, is based out of China. And so the Chinese are constructing a massive series of dams to dam up the Himalayan water sources for India's major rivers like the Brahmaputra, the Indus. There's two others I'm forgetting the exact name for. The Ganges is fine, though. The Ganges is not being dammed up. And so the Chinese are basically trying to use control of India's water as a political leverage against India. And I think that's very threatening given India really needs that water. The Gangetic Plain's got 1.5 billion inhabitants.
Cool. Theodore, you've got another question. So why don't you ask your question, Theodore?
Oh, yes. Being a person from Sweden, I was wondering, like, I've always wondered about things reverting to Swedish political history, such as what if Finland remained part of Sweden until the modern day, because Finland was a Swedish territory, as well as what if Sweden was like a colonial empire, similar to say Portugal or the Netherlands. The part with the Finland, if Finland remained part of Sweden, I've always kind of come to the conclusion if Finland remained a part of Sweden, Sweden would have just joined the Axis and basically become a second Mussolini-style empire with just incompetent leadership. After all, like, Sweden was the ones who invented the idea of eugenics, and as we know it, like, much of the Nazi idea of eugenics come from from Swedish schools of thought, which part of Sweden that a lot of Swedes aren't really that proud of. And honestly, yeah. That is technically two questions, technically.
So your question, as I understand it, is what would happen if Sweden kept Finland after the Napoleonic Wars? Great.
That and colonial empire.
Yeah, I remember a couple months ago you offered to pay me to make that video. So if Sweden kept Finland and the Russians didn't take it, I don't see why they would have gotten involved in World War I, because Sweden would have a third more people, I'm guessing. I don't know the exact population numbers, but I don't really see why they'd be incentivized.
Finland is 5 million. Finland is
5 million, Sweden 6 million, so double population.
No, modern day Sweden has 10 million. Sweden has just under 6.
Okay, so expanding by like a third, or 50%. And I don't really see why they'd be incentivized to get involved into World War I. I mean, so it would move their frontier closer to Petrograd. And so you could have seen them get involved once the Germans were up in Estonia. But I don't really know enough to make that call. I don't know how it would have affected their political balance before World War I. Like, I know there was a strong communist component. I know that Finland had its communist socialist civil war. I don't really know enough to make that call, however. Swedish colonial empire, you'd basically have to have Sweden stay out of the 30 Years' War and do less of the Northern Wars, because in our timeline, the Swedes did their colony in Delaware, colony in Ghana, and then 30 Years' War happened. They were fighting in Germany, fighting in Austria, and the Dutch just stole their colony in North America. So you'd have to see the Swedes put more investment in that and less into Europe. But the issue you run into is the only major Swedish port on the North Sea at that time was Gothenburg. They didn't control the Sunds. That was Danish control. And also the issue you run into is that if the Swedes are investing into their naval empire, they wouldn't be investing into Europe. And so you'd probably see the Catholics and the Habsburgs win the 30 Years' War and make all of Germany Catholic.
And I suppose the problem is for Sweden to have holdings in the New World is purely geopolitical, is, to control the western edge of the Baltic, which was actually the Danes and stuff. So that actually need to do that. Another question, which maybe the last question we're going to take actually from YouTube. What if Emperor Frederick III had been Kaiser for much longer than his short period? So in other words, we don't have Kaiser Wilhelm II. He's delayed for maybe 10, 15 years. How would European history be different?
Yes, it's
I was actually
Kaiser Frederick is the ultimate historical advertisement against smoking, because more or less.
Yeah. So I actually was talking to a friend about this, and it was a really, really brilliant timeline that I only thought about once you mentioned it, but it's a really good idea, because you could make the argument Kaiser Bill started World War World War I, because the reckless manner he behaved. So Germany would never have built up its navy, which was a major insistence of Kaiser Wilhelm. And so that would never have pissed off Britain, because Britain didn't really care at the continent. They just wanted the continent to not get unified. And the German building up a navy threatened Britain's naval supremacy. So you wouldn't have seen Britain get involved in continental politics. I don't know if World War I would get delayed. It's kind of shocking World War I happened as late as it did, because it was 99 years of peace in Europe, which is the aberration. But if the war were to break out, Germany would win it. And if the war weren't to break out, then that's a whole nother story.
I always think when you look at when you look at the Entente, there's absolutely no reason for Britain to join with France. All of Britain's historical and at the late 19th century beefs are with France and with Russia.
Yes.
Yes. It makes no sense. And
yes.
And it is one of those instances where the personality of the Emperor of Germany, even though he's the grandson of the Queen of England, makes a big blooming difference.
Yes.
Because the British were much more emotionally aligned with the Germans.
Yes.
And had no geopolitical beefs with them at all.
Yes. The balance of power is a fickle thing.
True that. Let's have one last question, then maybe we can kill this stream.
Can I pick one from the YouTube line?
You go for it, Claire.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to find out. But the question in the chat was around why didn't Genghis Khan invade India? But maybe the more appropriate alternative history question would be, what if Genghis Khan invaded India successfully? One assumes.
Genghis Khan actually did invade India. Jalal al-Din, the Khwarizmid prince, he went into India to found an army to basically drive the Mongols out of Khwarizm. And he was building up an army among the Muslim princedoms of modern-day Pakistan. And then Genghis Khan invaded that, wiped out Jalal's army on the Indus. Jalal actually fled to Iraq, founded his own separate kingdom, but Genghis Khan didn't keep going. If Genghis Khan stayed and attacked further into India, he almost certainly would have won. I mean, the guy's Genghis Khan, and he would have become far wealthier, and he wouldn't have invaded Russia. And so I don't think anything would change besides Genghis Khan would be richer. Because
there's a problem with Genghis Khan is that Mongol armies do not work well in tropical weather. Didn't their bows kind of break right during the humidity?
I would see him fighting across the Gangetic Plain, where it was already deforested with rice farms and stuff. The land's dead flat. I mean, the Mughals conquered that area. So many Turkish people conquered that area. Nomadic tribes did fine in the Gangetic Plain. It was when they went south into the Deccan and the Coromandel coast in southern India that they had more issues. And I mean, Subutai and the guys who led the Mongol Empire after Genghis Khan, they were all perfectly capable leaders. So they would have just made the conquest Genghis did later rather than conquering India.
Right, there you go. And I must admit, that's one bit of the world, India, where my historical knowledge is pretty scant. I remember just reading about a month ago about the Portuguese fighting a battle in the Indian subcontinent against the Ottoman Turks. I was like, I beg your pardon?
Yeah.
And one of the Indian kings who fought in that battle was actually a black African slave, and he was the Grand Vizier. I was like, who needs alternative history when you've got real history which you just don't even know about? But anyway, listen, exactly. Rudyard Lynch, thank you for coming on to Map Corner. It's been great to have you on the show. You're going to come on. You're going to be part of Intelligent Speech, my conference here on April the 24th, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. For all of you who don't know, it's a 24-hour conference with 40 content creators such as myself. And it's going to be a great time. I'm going to be making a video about, or I'm going to be doing a live stream where, very similar to this, where people can ask me questions about how alternate history and geopolitics lets us view history as a living, fluid process rather than just dates and things that have happened. And but you can see all sorts of other content. $30, but 20 if you buy now. Great value for your money.
There you go. And on that note, also, if you're watching this stream and you're one of Rudyard's many subscribers, why don't you search out the podcast Map Corner? We do one a month, and we just love maps. And if you're on this channel, you probably love maps too. So if you love maps, there you go, the podcast. There you go. That's us. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this great What If Alternative History and Map Corner mashup. So it's ta-ra from me, properly. And do you want to say goodbye as well, Claire?
Bye, folks.
And Rudyard, why don't you sign off properly, sir? Because we're all here, and in your honour, you say goodbye, and I'll close down the stream.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very great to have you. Very great to be here. Thank you very much. Bye.
There you go, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.